Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. Today is a special episode of PROVOCAUTEUR with Tyler Harris, who is bringing Ridley Scott to us. Tyler, before we get into all the many movies that I watched in preparation for this, why Ridley Scott? Why now? Please tell us.
Why not?
Okay. I shouldn't have said why now.
I think Ridley is a very fascinating filmmaker. As far as I gauge with the film community, whatever it be, film Twitter, letterbox, whatever. I usually try to stay out of the circles of film Twitter. But when I gauge with the film community, Ridley strikes me as someone who is persistently, consistently overlooked and taken for granted. He is so talented and is operating on a completely different level from most other filmmakers, to the point where I think people have just kind of like, oh, there's another Ridley movie. It's just going to be another Ridley movie. And then, so he's very much taken for granted these days. And I find that very irritating, personally, because I think he's one of my favorite directors, if not my favorite director. So,
do you think that the reason people take him for granted is partially because he puts out so many films lately? Like, maybe not lately, but in the past, there was a certain period of time where it was just one every so often, and now it's like...
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I think it was 2021, he did 2 movies in 1 year. The Last Duel and Gucci, House of Gucci. Father, Son, House of Gucci. And so he is incredibly prolific. He is and we'll probably get into this a lot, but he's a classicist first and foremost. By that, I just mean that he loves classical literature, classical art, and he loves to sort of imbue or soak or permeate his films in that kind of classically steeped vibe. You mentioned this in your Hannibal, I think your Hannibal review, that he's the perfect person for that movie.
Yes.
And I agree 100% because,
yes.
He's a classicist first and foremost.
He literally is like Dr. Lecter. Like when I was watching that movie, I was like, I don't think that the cannibal serial killer aspect necessarily spoke to him, but the way that Hannibal is about art and music. Oh gosh.
I think Ridley finds a lot of personable, empathetic connection with very unempathetic, sociopathic characters. Hannibal Lecter, David the android, everybody's favorite little freak, or at least my favorite little freak. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say Orlando Bloom in Kingdom of Heaven, but that's just bad acting.
We'll get there. We got an argument. We got some fighting to do over that movie.
I was going to say, Tyler and I agree most of the time, actually. A surprising amount of time, I feel like we are very much on the same page ideologically, because you are a very philosophical person, and you yourself, just like Ridley, are preoccupied with history, to quote Virginia Woolf, but you are like very much aligned with him. So I think the aesthetic pleasure that you receive is very kindred.
Very much so. Yeah.
But I think also that I am very literarily bent. And so Ridley was really the perfect director, I think, not just for you to do, but for both of us, because the things that you relate to, I can also. And I was very surprised by that, because I associated Ridley Scott with Alien, Blade Runner, Gladiator, the big ones more so than the clunkers. But I didn't think at all that...
What clunkers? There are no clunkers. Just kidding.
House of Gucci. Okay. I won't even get into that. But the point is that I wasn't expecting... He didn't do Mamma Mia.
No, no. I was doing my Jared Leto
Jared Leto.
in House of Gucci. Although what I would pay to see Ridley Scott do Mamma Mia.
Oh my
Wow.
gosh.
Okay, we're entering in a whole new world, a whole new
Or just
dimension
Ridley
now.
Scott doing a musical, period. I wish that
Oh
he would
yeah,
do
yeah.
I wish he would adapt Shakespeare, honestly. I don't know why he hasn't done like he could do what Kenneth has done easily, I think,
Yeah,
and like really enjoy himself.
yeah. He's got that English sensibility, certainly.
Exactly.
Um, yeah,
But anyway, the point
Ridley
is
doing Shakespeare. I mean, my dream project, of course. All right, I told myself, I did not tell you this. I told myself before I clicked open this podcast app that we're in, I told myself you will not talk about the Iliad. But one
here
thing,
we are.
my dream project for Ridley is him doing an Iliad movie. Not
Has
Wolfgang
anyone done an
Peterson.
Iliad film?
Wolfgang Peterson did Troy, which is a
Oh
riff on
gosh.
the Iliad. It's not
Okay.
the Iliad. It's
Mm.
what's that guy's name? Is it
Brad
Benioff
Pitt?
from Game of Thrones? Yes, Brad Pitt. But Benioff, one of the writers from Game of Thrones, is the guy who
Yeah,
wrote the
David.
script to
Uh-huh.
Troy. And it is not good. It is
No.
one of those, and there's just lots of like weird jabs at people that actually like to read Homer, which I know is probably
Nerdy.
rarer these days than it was in the past. But like there just for one instance, and then we'll move back because this is a digression. But in Troy, there's over and over and over again. There's characters being like, "This war could go on for 10 years if we don't stop it and do something about." It's like, but then if you've read the Iliad, that the war is 10 years long, and that everything that happens in the Iliad is at the end of those 10 years, and that plays into the exhausted mentality and psyche of the characters. And so it's like this truncated, shrunken version of the Iliad that takes place over like 10 days as opposed to 10 years. But then he throws all of these lines of like, this could be 10 years long if we're not careful. It's like, shut up. Just shut up. What are you doing?
Tyler, he just wants you to know that he's read it, okay?
Okay.
He's trying to communicate that he is in on the joke or in on the history, but does not have enough time. That
Yeah.
movie was probably still 3 hours long, though, even though it didn't cover a great span of time.
Yeah, I think the director's cut is 3 hours, and it's just it's a good movie. It's just not a good Iliad movie, which is why I think Ridley, someone as classically steeped as Ridley is, would do an Iliad movie like no tomorrow. I mean, it's the reason why. Yeah,
My vote is Shakespeare, but I'm fine with him doing.
yeah.
You know what? The Iliad really should be a mini series. Let's have like Ridley Scott do the Iliad for HBO, and it'd be like 6 episodes, an hour and a half long each, and it's this gigantic production.
Speaking of dream projects, that's my dream project for Ridley. Ridley's dream project for himself is Blood Meridian. He's been trying to get Blood Meridian made for decades, and it never got off the ground. And now I think John Hillcoat is in the middle of making it. I think he'll do fine, but I don't think he's going to be Ridley Scott. You need someone who's willing to be just like as cold and clinical and bloody nasty as possible.
I don't really see. Do you see Ridley as being cold and clinical, though? Those are not two adjectives that I would use to describe his films.
He can be. He has especially latter day Ridley. Maybe I'm conflating latter day Ridley with like old day Ridley, but today Ridley Scott to me has a very kind of acidic tone to his movies, very kind of sterile, not like Fincher, but there's a sterility there.
Maybe it's just old age. Like maybe when men get older, this is what happens.
Yeah.
What is that movie where they're like their souls die or whatever, their hearts die?
What? What?
There's a line that's from a movie where he's like, they're like the men, when the men get older, their souls die or something like that. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. That's all. Just talking about dream projects. Okay. Yeah.
Well, what I was saying 10 minutes ago is that that I was surprised that Ridley's movies were not just brilliant sci-fi or great action, but they are all really asking existential questions. And a lot of them, like, specifically acknowledge God, or like, what are we doing here? The meaning of life. And that was really a nice thing. Even in G.I. Jane, there's like references to purpose. And so I really appreciated that. That really surprised me. So how we're going to arrange this, because Tyler and I are very overwhelmed at this task of covering such a monumental filmography, that I think we're going to start from the beginning, because Tyler forced me to watch The Duelists. And if I don't express my dissatisfaction and disillusionment, then I will lose my mind. So it starts in 1977 with The Duelists, which Tyler gave 5 stars. Actually, Tyler, before we get into it, how many of his films did you give 5 stars to?
So we were having this conversation. I think so. Ridley right now is at 13, I believe,
Right.
on Letterboxd. 13 fivers. And then I think there's only 2 directors in my kind of list of auteurs that I love. There's only 2 directors who outrank Ridley, and that is, coincidentally enough, Tony, his brother, who's at 14, I believe. And who knows, when Gladiator 2 comes out, Tony and Ridley might end up tied there.
Tied.
And then I'm already anticipating that. And then the only other director who has kind of the upper hand, blows them both out of the water, with 17, and that's Ingmar Bergman, who we probably should have done an episode on together, but Ridley's more fun. So
less
or at least
incest.
he's more fun to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's less dark. Bergman, I do love Bergman, but Bergman is one of my directors where I've given one of his films half a star and several of them 5 stars. And so there's definitely ones that I
What's
hated.
like we're not going to turn this into a Bergman episode, but just out of curiosity, what's like a half star Bergman for you? Just so I can gauge like where you're at with Bergman.
It's the red one. Was it Cries and Whispers?
Yeah. Okay. Really?
Yeah, I hated that.
A half star. Okay.
Through a Glass Darkly, I also did not like at all. I think
so you're
Fanny and
rattling
Alexander,
off all of these masterpieces, and
I know we'll disagree on this.
Yeah.
Fanny and Alexander and The Virgin Spring are definitely 5.
Good. The Virgin Spring is I think my favorite Bergman.
Yes.
So
yeah, that one is like, I bought that on Criterion immediately after I watched it, and then Fanny and Alexander, I have the Christmas box set. It's just beautiful, like, and the presentation.
You have not seen the TV version, right?
I haven't, no, and I need to.
Which is the only version of Fanny and Alexander that exists, as far as I'm concerned. So,
is that true? Do you like it that much?
Oh, I mean, when you read about, it's kind of like we were talking Kingdom of Heaven. Like, the director's cut is so much more expansive and has so many more plot intricacies and character intricacies than the theatrical cut, that basically the theatrical cut should just be deleted from existence. The Fanny and Alexander theatrical cut cuts out, and this isn't a spoiler or anything, but there's some ghost stuff in the TV version. There are ghosts, and there are it just feels a lot more thorough for out of respect for the characters. So that TV version of Fanny Alexander is so much better than the theatrical.
That's kind of like a Decalogue project, where I would do it at the end of the year. That's a good thing to do, I think, in December.
Fanny and Alexander is very much a Christmas movie too, so it would fit right into that time of year.
That time frame. Yeah. Okay, so The Duelists. This was Ridley Scott's first film. For reasons that I do not know, and I hope that you do, because it was bothering me the entire time. He has the main 2 characters Americans, and then they're like surrounded by British actors, but it's like baffling to me, the casting, and it just like ruins the thing. I don't think it's a bad story, but Harvey Keitel and Keith Carradine being the leads makes absolutely no sense and bothered me to no end.
What if I told you it did make sense? What if I told you that these characters are supposed to be kind of polar opposites? And so you have, first of all, you need them to stand out from the rabble, the crowd, the vulgar masses, right? The soldiers. And so
Mm-hmm.
why not cast two Americans who will stand out from the British? Secondly, Ridley doesn't give a damn about accents ever. So that's probably something we'll need to acknowledge. Like, I know you have.
Has he said that? Is
It
that true?
wouldn't surprise me if he has said it. Maybe not in an interview, but maybe while he's in his tent watching somebody's performance. I don't know. Like Napoleon, for instance, Joaquin Phoenix is not even attempting a French accent in that, but it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. It's like what matters is character, narrative, visual. We're not going to concern ourselves with like historic period specific accents or anything like that. You know, it's not Robert Eggers. Let's say that.
Okay,
which is
but
one of the reasons why I love Eggers. But yeah,
Tyler, don't you find it jarring or at least off-putting when like the main characters are American and then everyone else around them is British? I think the problem here for me is that I want it to be the same across the board. I don't care if you do Napoleon without French accents, because most films that take place in France do not have French accents. But to have like two Americans and everyone else be British, or it could be vice versa, two British people and everyone else American, I can't deal with it. It's
fine.
It takes me out.
Yeah, if it takes you out, it takes you out. It doesn't take me out. And again, I think there's a functionality to it. I think that you need these characters to sort of stand apart, and then also, you know, just the contrast between Keitel and Carradine is pretty stark. If you need these characters to be polar opposites, you cast one tall Californian blonde, and then you get a scrappy, short little East Coaster, and it just makes sense to me. It fits. It works.
No.
Yeah, and then, you know, when I think of The Duelists, I think of that final shot, which is one of the few shots in all of cinema that have actually just left me completely aghast at how just phenomenally composed and gorgeous it is. This long shot of the horizon that eventually kind of pulls out. It dolly zooms. Go back and watch that final shot, because there's so many things happening just like in the camera. But it's dolly zooming. It's going across the horizon. It's also tracking so that Harvey Keitel will eventually end up in the frame, and then he's kind of staring off into the distance. And I think that final shot gets at the heart of what that movie is about, which is, well, obviously it's a movie about warring brothers and that sort of archetype. They're kind of like Cain and Abel in a sense.
But it's also the foolishness and futility of man, right?
It's the foolishness and futility of man. That's the perfect way to put it. Yeah, the perfect way to put it. The folly of man. You're finally racked with the realization that, I guess it's one question: what was all of this for? and then he's looking at the horizon, and I think he's coming to the realization. I mean, obviously he is meant to look like Napoleon standing on St. Helena in exile, right?
Yes.
And so that's a great kind of sort of book-ending Ridley's career in a way, with The Duelists and Napoleon.
Napoleon. If only he'd stopped there.
And now he's going back to Gladiator. So
right.
And then before that, he was going back to Alien and Blade Runner. So,
I know.
But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So actually, this is great, because so we have The Duelist on one end, then we have Napoleon on one end. The next movie is Alien, and then we have Prometheus and Covenant, and then the next one is Blade Runner, and then you have more Blade Runner in the future. So actually, for a while, it's like it's very interesting foreshadowing without him knowing that it was going to come about. But do you actually? So Duelist was in 1977, Alien's in 1979. Before I say anything, Alien is a 10 out of 10. Alien is in my top 10 films, period. I think it is the perfect film. It is exquisite. I mean, every shot is, and I mean like every shot. That's just not like, I'm not exaggerating.
Yep.
Every shot is stunning. And the fact that it's in 1979, like it doesn't show in any way at all. It doesn't ever feel dated. I'm a major fan of Alien, which is why I hate Aliens. But anyway, so do you know anything about how Scott got into this? Like how this came about?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, let me agree with you. I don't hate aliens.
I do. Yeah.
I just
Sorry.
think I'm so much more of an Alien fan than I am an Aliens fan that it just
Me too.
completely. But that's part of the franchise, though. To give Aliens its credit, Aliens starts this trend in the Alien series that one of the reasons why I love the series so much is every single Alien film is meant to be completely different than the last one, right? Of course, now we're getting Disney Alien, which looks like it's going to be digging into the member berries. Like, remember what '79 Alien was like? We're going back to the
Right.
original. We're going old school. So I'm still
Like
excited.
Romulus.
Yeah, I'm still excited for Romulus, but it is a little irritating that we're kind of regressing as opposed to progressing in the series. Especially when you have Ridley Scott wanting to make a sequel to Covenant, and you're not allowing him to do it. I could talk about that for 2 hours.
Yeah,
but
that's very irritating, and that's the saddest thing for me, having watched Prometheus and Covenant like now as opposed to then, is that now I'm just like, where's the next David movie?
Yes,
and the thought that
we want our little mad scientist freak back
to come back.
Yeah.
But I think Aliens is because it's James Cameron, and because it's like so James Cameron. And silly. And I mean, I really should like it at face value. I just think that as the follow-up to Alien, that's what bothers me. I wish that it were just like a different movie from a different franchise, and then I probably would like it, but I cannot go from that to that.
Yeah.
Mentally.
It is a little bit of whiplash.
Yeah. And it's such a different tone.
Yeah, it turns Alien into a bit of an arcade game in a way.
Which people love. I'm in the major minority here.
Yeah, fair enough. I know a lot of people that love Aliens. I'm just not one of them. So
yeah. Okay, but how did he get it? Why did he start it?
So it's interesting. You hate The Duelist, but you love Alien so much because it is The Duelist that ends up with him getting Alien. I believe.
Oh.
Yeah. It's who is the production company? Brandywine. I think it's Walter Hill and David Giler, and I think I'm missing a name, Carol. Why is his first name slipping me? Anyway, it's this group of guys. They end up seeing The Duelist at Cannes, and and they are.
It should be Cannes, but it's Cannes.
Yeah, Cannes. They see The Duelist and they realize, hey, Walter, buddy, I know you're attached to direct Alien and you're kind of falling out of love with the idea of directing Alien. How about we get this guy who did The Duelist and let's see what he's got. It was a bunch of other directors that were attached or interested in working on Alien. I think Spielberg was attached at some point.
No.
He was too busy. I forget who else.
It would have been too nice with Spielberg.
Yeah, there was another director who was like attached to direct, and then they were asking him like, "How are you going to do the face hugger?" And he's like, "Oh, we'll just slice up a liver and we'll throw it on someone's face, and that'll be fine." It's like the opposite of Ridley, who's like so meticulous and precise with Giger's art, and making it feel truly alien and malevolent, and like you are encountering an actual like otherworldly being that has a whole entire like evolutionary landscape to its existence and things. So but yeah, it's those three. They see The Duelist. They contact Ridley. Ridley had actually been working on an adaptation of Tristan and Isolde, the Wagner opera that he was going to make into a Celtic romance. And then he saw Star Wars and he thought to himself, why would I make this a Celtic romance when I could make this like a space opera? Which, by the way, if Ridley is looking to go back to his career and like, because he's been doing this for a few years now, like going through his old movies and like rehashing some stuff, please make Tristan and Isolde. Ridley, if you're listening to this, please make a space opera.
Of course,
based
he
on
is.
a Wagnerian opera. Yeah. That would be like the most amazing thing ever. But so that fell through. He gets Alien, the screenplay, on his desk. Ridley is a firm believer in always doing the reading yourself. So he doesn't have any readers or anything like that. He reads the screenplays that come across his desk.
Okay, no, wait, pause. I
Yeah.
know, what's the guy's name? Dan?
O'Bannon, yeah.
O'Bannon. Was this a book or this is just something that he wrote?
This is his script, and then Walter Hill rewrites
but it wasn't okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I want to clarify that.
Yeah,
because I know that guy's kind of crazy, and Dan O'Bannon has written a bunch of stuff.
Dan O'Bannon is wild. He's an occultist. He's the one who brings Giger's art to Ridley, and it's when Ridley sees one of Giger's original conceptual artworks that looks like the xenomorph, he realizes, okay, first of all, that is the alien. Secondly, I'm dealing with an actual egghead nerd here, freak, Dan O'Bannon. So just that artwork is so provocative and disturbing and incredible. I mean, I have a book of Giger's
scary.
work there. Oh yeah,
it's terrifying, and I don't even know what I would compare as far as like how real it looks. It doesn't. It's just so. And I know that's like, it's also lighting, and there's also a lot of different elements to like in the cinematography that just make it menacing. But I mean,
do you see the sort of sterility though there? Because it kind of starts in Alien. There's this clinical. It's space truckers basically. It's truckers in space. So there's a grime. There's a blue collar appeal. There's a grime to it. You know, that sets up the sort of subtext of like the blue collar workers versus the corporate Weyland-Yutani kind of dynamic of it. But like, there's still this kind of everything is white and everything is kind of.
It's almost like a hospital.
It's very, it's very kind of hospital-esque. Anyway, he reads the script and decides to take it on, and the rest is history. The themes that he introduces into his filmography. We should also mention, by the way, he's over 40 years old when he starts making feature films. He's over 40 when he starts making The Duelists and Alien and Blade Runner. He's over 40 years old. I think it's important to remember that Ridley Scott is a workman. He's a workhorse. He has a work ethic like nobody else in Hollywood, from what I can kind of understand.
He's kind of like Altman, right? Because Victor told me that about Altman, that he just like he worked and he saw it as a profession and like a job, and there was no sort of glamorizing or romanticizing the work part of it, you know? That it was
Two things. There was a New Yorker profile that came out about Ridley where he kind of divulges a little. It's the most personal I've ever seen him get. He talks about the black dog of depression that sort of lurks over him, and that his work keeps the dog away. And I think that at bay. I think that is very, very telling of the type of person Ridley is. Secondly, he's a little bit like Napoleon. In Napoleon, he has Napoleon say this line that it's like, it's about where you put the cannons, right? That's what wins you battles. And Ridley has actually been in interviews said the exact same thing, but about cameras. I know where to put cameras. It's about where you put the cameras. So he's renowned. He's famous for like 2 takes, 3 takes. He's sort of like a Clint Eastwood. He's the opposite.
Eastwood is what I was
the opposite of Kubrick or Fincher. But he sets up like, he'll set up like 8 cameras around the actors, and they'll do 2 or 3 takes. And usually Ridley is in his tent, like across the lot, watching it all happen on his monitors. He's not usually actually there. Earlier in his career, he's, getting dirty and getting in the grime. But as he gets older and as his career continues, Ridley has kind of become Napoleon. I don't want to use the comparison of Napoleon at Waterloo, but like Napoleon in his tent, all the men are doing the work and the fighting out there, but he's orchestrating it, from his little hut or whatever. He has a work ethic like no tomorrow. He started in commercials and TV, right? He graduated from the Royal Academy of Art?
Academy?
Royal Academy of, or Royal College of Art. I think it's Royal College of Art, the RCA. And from there, he starts Ridley Scott Associates, and I believe they end up doing like 2,000 or 3,000 commercials. Him and Tony and a group of other directors,
Wow.
they make like 2,000 or 3,000 commercials. That was his life until he was like 40 years old, and then he started making features.
Did Tony make a movie before he did?
Well, they made a movie together in 1965, I believe, called Boy and Bicycle, and that's when Tony is a kid. Ridley's just slightly older, and Ridley directs Tony in a movie. So Tony is an actor in the movie. And
then at some point they start scot-free together.
Yes,
not
yeah.
just.
Tony starts doing his own movies in '83 with The Hunger, which is very much in conversation with Blade Runner. They're basically the same movie. The Hunger is Blade Runner, but instead of androids, it's vampires. Like, they're the same exact movie. They're about the same thing. The tensions between, Western Christian civilization and its pagan roots, that's very much at play there. There's also the idea of, you don't know what makes you human until you encounter the inhuman. And that's sort of the theme of Blade Runner, and also the theme of The Hunger. Same movie, but with vampires. That's Tony Scott's first movie, 1983. But
So it was 77 and 83. So they're on like it's so interesting because I can't think of, I was trying to think like, what are two brothers who would be, I know Christopher Nolan, Jonathan Nolan, or Jonah Nolan kind of comes to mind, but there's not a lot where it's this aligned, especially since I ended it on G.I. Jane, and I thought of so many Tony Scott movies, and to the point where I am convinced that Tony Scott actually did that movie. And really, truly, it was nothing about it except for the female protagonist's characterization reminded me of Ridley at all. It's just doing a completely different thing. But I like how they, even in their differences, they also have similarities between them, and how you can just, it's fun, that component of Ridley that's Tony is also there.
Yeah. So I got a master's degree in education, so I wasn't able to write a thesis on Ridley Scott and Tony Scott, but I always told myself, if I ever get like a master's in, fine arts or
anything,
film or whatever, like, or maybe a PhD, like, that is my dissertation. I don't think anyone has written about this. The relationship between Tony and Ridley Scott is fascinating to watch. If you watch his films in order and you intersperse Tony's films in
that's what I was going to say.
There's so much in conversation. The Hunger. I mean, what is G.I. Jane? G.I. Jane is Top Gun, but with a woman.
Yes.
Like,
and it's also Enemy of the State. I thought of it, even though Enemy of the State hadn't come out yet, to be fair, because G.I. Jane was 97 and Enemy was 98. But that reminded me so much. All the government stuff, the first half of it being a thriller. I think the Top Gun stuff is the military part, but Enemy of the State is definitely the thriller, messed up senators, the evil part of 100%. The politics.
Yeah. Even stylistically, you'll see. Obviously, Tony and Ridley are playing off of each other throughout their whole careers. That sort of, it's the thing that I love. Speak about provocateur or auteur. Like, I'm sure somebody probably saw the title of this episode, sees that we're talking about Ridley Scott, and thinks to themselves, why the hell are they talking about Ridley Scott in a series on auteurs? He's not an auteur. Yes. He's a workman. But it's like, no. You can tell a Ridley Scott or a Tony Scott movie when you're watching them. It's like, here's one sure way to do it. Okay. Is there a window? Is there harsh white light coming through it? Does the window have Venetian blinds that are causing the light to kind of slant? And then also, is the room filled unnecessarily but beautifully and amazingly with a lot of hazy fog so that it accentuates the light? There you go. There's your auteur theory for Ridley and Tony, stylistically at least. But
that literally was in G.I. Jane when she goes.
It's in everything. It's in everything. Yeah.
When she goes to meet with Scott Wilson, who's just a jerk, and she's like, "Actually, you're the one who's messing everything up and treating me." Especially, there's the light coming through the blinds, and it's just a regular scene where he's smoking a cigar, and there's no reason for it to look that good, then it just does.
See, that's the key. That's the key to Ridley. That's the key to Tony. There's no reason for this scene to look as good as it does, And every time,
And I
they knock it out.
that's the appeal of what's the crazy movie he did with De Niro and Snipes? The
The
Fan.
Fan.
Tony.
Yeah.
Tony.
It's
Okay,
one of the
that
best
movie,
movies ever.
that Swart would agree with you, but that movie is so over the top, and but it looks like you're watching like an Oscar nominee for Best Picture, and it has no business looking like that based on what it is. So
except it has
I agree
every
with you.
business looking that great.
That movie's ridiculous.
I was just on a plane back from Scotland last week, and when I was looking through the list of movies, so on the way there, this was my first ever international trip. So I'm on the plane. On the way to Scotland, I'm looking through the movies that are on the screen in front of me. And as soon as I get to the D's, I went alphabetical. I see Days of Thunder, and I go, okay, I got to watch Days of Thunder, right? Okay. On the way back, I was like, my wife was next to me, and she's watching like Pride and Prejudice and Emma and Phantom Thread. She watched like 4 movies on the plane, okay? And I got 2. I got Gladiator and Napoleon. Nice. I just think it's hilarious. She got 4, I got 2 because they're so long.
Yes, because they're so long.
So big and grand. But yeah, so one thing I noticed when I was watching Gladiator this time, I was like, hang on a second. This came out in 2000, and you've got that opening battle sequence against the barbarians. The Romans are fighting, and the whole entire fight sequence plays out, and it has this kind of Ridley is playing a lot with the frame rate, and so like everything is blurry and crazy, right? Okay, he literally does that. I think 2 years before Tony officially makes that his entire stylistic appeal. Tony is split in 2. His career is split in 2. There's the early Tony Scott, and then there's the late stage Tony Scott, like Man on Fire, Deja Vu, Pelham 1, 2,
Denzel.
3, Unstoppable. Yeah, but you notice
Denzel 4 times.
Exactly. Yeah. The stylistic quality to those movies, it's very schizophrenic. It's very kind of wavy, and the frame rate is being played with a lot. It almost looks like a Wong Kar-wai film in a way. And I think Tony gets that from Ridley, who is toying around with that idea in Gladiator. So again, this idea that these two brothers are in such artistic conversation together, it really, really drives home, I mean, obviously the ultimate tragedy of Tony getting a brain tumor, taking his own life, and basically leaving Ridley here to figure things out on his own. I mean, in
2012.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about Ridley Scott, I broke his career into phases. And it was like coming onto the scene, and then the 80s haze, and then 1990s Ridley. The title of the phase was
he doesn't know what to do with his hands.
1990s Ridley doesn't know what to do with his hands, because all of his movies from the 90s, you know, they vary from being, you know, good to great, but like none of them have anything to do with the other. Like there's no real. You can tell he was just like in a wonderland of like, I guess I'll do this movie, and I guess I'll do this movie, and you know, I'll do 1492, and then I'll turn around and do White Squall, and then I'll turn around and do G.I. Jane.
Right.
It's just
G.I.
weird,
Jane.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get
Gladiator.
And then 2000, you get like that's when like legendary status Ridley Scott starts, right? Like I'm a legend, I can do whatever I want. I'm gonna do, you know, Gladiator. I'm gonna do Hannibal. I'm gonna Black Hawk Down. I'm gonna go Kingdom of Heaven.
Matchstick Men,
right? Like I am a legend. I can do whatever. Right, I can do whatever I want to do. But then you get Tony's death, right? And
in 2012,
I think you can see post Tony's death. You know, Prometheus comes out in 2012, right? And obviously he was making that movie, you know, before Tony died. But then immediately after Prometheus, he follows it up with The Counselor, which is just first of all, it's his first time to actually work with Cormac McCarthy, which again was his dream. Secondly, it is a eulogy to his brother. The Counselor is maybe not stylistically, but thematically the movie that feels the most like a Tony Scott movie. Maybe G.I. Jane looks the most like a Tony Scott movie, but The Counselor feels so much like it's playing into Tony's proclivities of fate and hubris and love and romance and all of this stuff that's it through the lens of Ridley Scott and Cormac McCarthy. So it's a tragedy ultimately, and very, very much so, as in like rooted as deeply into Greek tragedy, the roots of human tragedy as you can go. That movie is. But it's the counselor on. The counselor forward is what I like to call the piss and vinegar era of Ridley Scott. It's like he is upset. He's grieving still. He's processing his grief, and he's doing it in a little bit like Lars von Trier might like process his depression or something. Like he like is
Antichrist.
Yeah, he's outwardly sometimes even just like lashing out at the audience, right? Like Alien Covenant, for instance, is I think one of the better examples of that, where he's like, okay, you all didn't like Prometheus. You didn't like what I was trying to do. You didn't like this big, heady, ambitious science fiction adventure. I'm going to give you one of the darkest, I think it's
bleakest.
Bleak. Is it David Ehrlich? I think, I don't want to mention David Ehrlich on a podcast, but I'm going to do it. Is it David Ehrlich? I think who, I think he calls it a slow motion genocide, and that's exactly what it is. It is just a horrifically bleak, dark, turn. Is that really all you want? You want xenomorphs slashing people up and killing them? Okay, here you go. That's essentially what Ridley's doing with Alien Covenant. Of course,
it seems like retaliatory. He seems pissed off. Before we get off Tony, though, I was going to say, do you think that I don't know if there's anybody else in The Counselor besides Brad Pitt that was in a Tony Scott, because Brad Pitt was in True Romance. But do you, like, for Gladiator 2, when I saw Denzel, my first thought was, that's for Tony.
Yeah.
And it's not just, right. That's no coincidence,
right.
obviously. So I think that it's not just homage. It's also that having Brad Pitt in The Counselor, to me, more than anything, communicates that just in a sort of subtle way, maybe this is for Tony, by using people that that he loved or that he used.
Yeah, they love to share actors in a weird way. I mean, obviously,
Denzel's the one that's
Denzel is kind of their mutual muse in an interesting way, because Ridley also has American Gangster.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
and he's used Crow a bunch of times, because he had Gladiator, Goodyear, and
have you seen A Good Year, by the way?
I haven't.
Okay, you should. That's
a weird one.
yeah, it's good though. It reminds me a bit of. It's a better version of The Martian. The Martian is an anomaly in Ridley Scott's career because it is one of the most optimistic movies ever made. And I watch it and I'm like, no, this doesn't feel right. I don't want my Ridley Scott optimistic and feel good. But then A Good Year is more. It is certainly.
Isn't it a rom-com or what? I mean,
yeah, it's a rom-com, but it still has that mid-2000s Ridley feel to it. Like, it's, again, like you said, it's shot in such a way that it's like, this has absolutely no business looking as good as it does.
Because it looks like the Diane Lane movie, like Under the Tuscan Sun.
Yes,
like
yes.
It just strikes me as something that's like very frivolous and like, I'm going to go off and, have a summer in Italy or whatever.
Yep, that's pretty much it. And, it is Ridley very much basically saying, hey, I literally live in the bungalow 2 miles away from the set of this movie. I'm going to create a movie set here, and I'm going to call Russell over, and we're going to have a really fun time. It is also a bit of an anomaly in his career, but I love it. I'm much more than The Martian. Yeah.
Okay, when The Martian came out, I'm almost positive. I can't remember if it's the exact same year as Interstellar, but I remember that when it came out, there were like a bunch of space type of things going on, and that's why I didn't watch it, because I was like spaced out. Maybe it was Gravity or there was. I was like, all right, that's enough. Gravity, Interstellar, The Martian. Right. I know there's something else that I'm forgetting, but that was one that I missed. And it just also didn't seem like it was that interesting. Like, what's the movie even about? Matt Damon is, and aren't there two Matt Damons in that movie? Am I wrong?
No, I think no.
There's not.
I don't think so. I haven't seen it since it came out in 2015. When I saw The Martian, I saw Sicario the same day. So I saw Sicario
Ooh,
earlier in the day, and then I saw The
great
Martian.
movie.
Yeah. So it's like Sicario was this. I mean, obviously it's brilliant, completely brilliant. But
Yes.
like, you're compelled and forced to watch this woman be taken advantage of and constricted by all of these masculine forces around her until she's basically reduced to nothing. It's a movie that makes you need to take a shower afterwards. And then the mental
Yeah.
shower that I took afterwards was going to see The Martian, which was like you walk out of there and you feel good. But I have since really kind of soured on The Martian a little bit just because it's
Mm.
such an anomalous, optimistic, like, yeah, just get that out of here.
Okay,
Give
but
me
why
all the
don't you
Last Duel and Napoleon
Okay,
and Covenant that you
you don't
need.
want any optimism from this guy, even though that would be a step forward for him, probably, because he's suffered enough, Tyler. Like
But he has
can't
to
he
suffer
have
for me. That's what you don't
for
understand.
his art? Okay, so we have to go back. We ended at Alien.
Yeah.
Tell me, I know you wanted to talk about this before we get too far into this. Alien preceded Blade Runner, and then for you, and I've heard this a lot and I've read this a lot, the future Alien movies, the Prometheus in 2012 and then Covenant in 2017 were like a merge, right? Especially Covenant particularly is a callback to Blade Runner and the original Alien. I also think it reminded me of Alien 3. Because especially at the beginning, and then it's dark hopelessness.
Oh yeah. Well, Alien 3, you start with, I mean, Alien 3 is the perfect movie for people like us who don't care too much for aliens. Is like, okay, we're hard reset. We're gonna kill Newt,
yeah,
and we're
right.
starting anew, and here's this really weird, like, kind of nihilistic edge to it, sort of a Nine Inch Nails vibe the whole time. But then you get this kind of
Metal.
Very industrial, metal. But then you get this redemptive ending in Alien 3 that just feels so much more authentic, and potent to me than anything we get in Aliens. But
so maybe the killing of Newt, maybe that parallels nicely with Shaw.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the whole reason why I brought it up, was Covenant has that feel of like, okay, well, we're doing a hard reset. If you didn't like Prometheus, well, we're going to slice Shaw open and make her the mother of the monster. It is horrific. The way that they treat her character is horrific and incredibly disappointing to people who like me, like other friends that I have who adore Prometheus for that kind of aspect of its ending, where it's like David and Shaw, the adventures of David and Shaw going off into space to investigate our origins as the human race, and then you get Covenant, and you're like, oh
yeah,
no.
And I'm like, where? No, when Covenant started, I was like, so where is she?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where is she?
Yeah.
Where is she?
Yeah.
And then we get Daniels, and as soon as I saw Daniels, I was like, no, like this means we cannot have two female brown-haired white women in the same space. So I knew that
there's your heroine, right?
It really reminds me of Lucas with like Ren. That type, that Leia type, it's so similar, where it's like white, brown hair, thin, whatever.
Did you say Lucas?
It's very consistent. Lucas Johnson, whatever.
Okay, yeah.
Ray,
Johnson. Yeah,
not
Ray.
Ren.
Yeah, okay,
Ray.
yeah. I was, yeah.
The Star Wars brunette character. It's never.
I think that's more at the hands of Kathleen Kennedy than anybody is.
I'll attribute that.
Yeah.
I can attribute Leia to Lucas, though.
If the movie character doesn't look exactly like me, how can I possibly empathize with them?
God. Well, Ripley beginning it, and then, I mean, I haven't seen, what's the one with Winona Ryder, but Winona Ryder would fit this type as well. Is it Alien Resurrection?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the one that my friend Rob loves and wants me to see. I probably should see
that. You should see it.
That one's crazy.
Alien Resurrection is like, I've always considered it an Elseworld alien tale. It's like, I do not consider this in my own head to be like canonical. Not that I care about canon, but like I don't want to consider that movie canonical, because it's like we have the DNA of Ripley and we're using it to make her clone, and her clone is wacky and crazy and can shoot basketball like nobody's business. That's an actual scene. but it has this feeling of like sort of like an other world, else world alien movie that's like a what if scenario that I can kind of vibe with, honestly. You bring in a wacky French director and you give it some.
Who directed Amelie, like, of
Yeah,
all things, like the quirky,
right,
heartwarming, you
yeah.
know, colorful, yeah, it kind of reminds me, is that the name of that Marvel show that came out, What If? Where they
I
do
think
all these
so.
different,
Yeah,
like,
I'm
yeah, what
I
if Captain America were like
yeah.
this, and what if this, yeah,
I
that's
don't
kind of a
know,
creative thing.
honestly. I don't do Marvel really much anymore, but yeah, I'm pretty sure
Tyler
there's.
doesn't subscribe to Disney Plus.
Oh, actually, I do, but yes,
Uh,
I just skip over the Marvel stuff and go straight for all of the Hulu merger material.
oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, yeah, all the aliens were on Hulu. Okay, so Blade Runner and Alien. Tell me how those things connected with Covenant and yeah, the replicant angle.
Okay. So we brought up this idea earlier of what makes us human can be found in the inhuman. I think
Mhm.
that Ridley and his screenwriters, but obviously Ridley, is very, very interested in um, concepts of AI, concepts of
Mhm.
androids and replicants. It is hilarious to me that Ridley calls they are called androids in the Alien universe, but Ridley calls David a replicant. And so it's like, yeah, we are very much merging Alien and Blade Runner together. This is
Mm,
almost too big to even tackle this idea of
I
like,
understand.
it's almost there's so much dense philosophy packed into everything Ridley and his screenwriters are doing in Covenant that it becomes overwhelming to I really like don't feel like I'll be able to articulate like
Like a condensed version of this.
the things that I've written about in my reviews for Covenant and Blade Runner are just very complex. There are the themes of I mean um, David is such a fascinating character to me. He is, I think, like my favorite movie character of the past like decade or something, at least since Daniel Plainview. Um, and
Ha,
that's a
that's good.
weird
That's a weird, yeah,
but
no
I
relation.
think David is just so fascinating. It's all so much a part of Fassbender's performance, of course. Like without that performance, he's not David. But the
Mhm.
story and narrative and characterization of David as this um, inhuman object that is created by humans, who then wants to imitate humans. And we get that one of my favorite sequences of Prometheus is him just walking around the spacecraft, the Prometheus, just walking around, waiting for everyone to wake up, and he's watching people's dreams. It's like he wants to know who people are and what they're all about, and so he watches their dreams. And of course, that comes back to bite Shaw later. But he watches people's
Yes.
dreams. He watches Lawrence of Arabia, right? He wants to be T.E. Lawrence, so he's dyeing his hair. He's repeating the trick. William Potter is not minding that it hurts. And we even get more basketball. Oh my gosh, he's riding
I
around
was about
in
to
the
say that.
bicycle and he's throwing the
Yes.
hoops. Yeah.
Also, Tyler, side note, did he I think that I read that he named Walter after Walter Hill, right? And then so the original guys who
Mm-hmm.
did Brandywine,
Yeah.
it wasn't there a David in there too? I don't know if
David
that was
Giler. Yeah. Yeah.
right. And then I know he named him Walter after Walter Hill, but continue. So
Yeah.
there's all these
It wouldn't
different,
surprise me if
there's a lot going
David's
on.
name is more connected, maybe to like I don't know
The statue.
Michelangelo's David and
Right. I
the
know.
idea of creator and creation, right?
I
The
understand.
sculpting, but yes, yeah, there is that
Yeah.
aspect as well.
It's nice.
Tell
It's
me what you
just all these little
yeah, tell
nods.
me what you think of this. To bring the duelist back into it. And the tensions of the duelist. Not I know you don't like the duelist, but the tensions at the heart of the duelist are very much what Ridley has been preoccupied with for so many years. This idea of you know um, resentment against being. Okay,
Mm.
so Carradine is so much more handsome and has everything. He's got the woman, and then you've got Keitel is this sort of, scrappy little, like I said, East Coaster, New Yorker kind of vibe, right? And there's very much this sort of resentment packed into their, the folly of their constant fighting with one another. The warring brothers archetype, right? Cain and Abel. What does that say about humanity? What does it say about our ability to progress past our sort of Hobbesian brutishness and the violence that permeates perpetually our cultures and our civilizations? These are very much things that Ridley that he's hyper fixated on throughout his career. Tell me what you think of this. David and Walter, they're brothers, basically.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It just reminds me so much of The Duelist, that's sort of warring brothers there.
The only thing is, I will say, I don't know if this veers too far off of your point, but I think that this is more preoccupied with maker creation
100%.
than anything.
Yes.
Like,
yes. But
I see this.
Go ahead.
I see this also as like, because David, spoiler, goes back to the world and then kills, finds his makers, kills them all. This is so much about like, who made me? Where do I come from? And then the darkness in David is not to like know who created him. It's to kill him or it or whatever. And then sort of there's the killing the maker part of it. And then there's also the him wanting to be a creator himself, right? Because he's crossbreeding and making all these things and these aliens. And so there's this like desire to destroy and desire to create that feel like they're both like have the same amount of velocity. And then when he meets Walter, that one seems more like almost like he wishes he could be like a mentor mentee situation. Like, oh, poor Walter, like you don't know how the world works and you don't really know anything. And you're like the updated version, but you actually like have no idea like what love is and the whole duty bound, love bound thing. And that you feel like David actually does understand and Walter doesn't, is like that David has transcended his own programming. I don't know. There's so much more there than just like that base of like brotherly competition or
okay
one-upsmanship.
Yeah. So William Blake, The Songs of Innocence and Experience. Okay. Obviously, Alien Covenant is permeated in romanticism. Okay, the era of 18th century poetry, where you have people like Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, or as I like to call him, Lord George Gordon Noel Byron III, who is right up here watching us have this conversation.
Dad.
Right,
I was like, this is...
So Mary Shelley. Okay. So first of all, Alien Covenant is Frankenstein. We're going to talk about that. We have to talk about it, and we will get there. Hopefully, I hope. But this movie is steeped in the romantic tensions of that age. The Romantics, on the one hand, they very, very much idolized these previous figures in literature who stood against God and fought, essentially. So there's a reason why Prometheus is called Prometheus. Okay, Prometheus stands against Zeus. Okay, now
for humanity, and then is punished.
Right, for humanity. Yeah, and that's key. That's key. Yeah, Prometheus brings art. That's something no one ever talks about with Prometheus. Not only does he bring fire, which gives us consciousness, okay, we're able to cook meat now, which means our digestive systems don't have to be so big. So our digestive systems shrink and our heads get bigger. And so when we are using fire to cook meat in those pre-modern, ancient days, that's a major step in evolution. That is a symbol of consciousness. Human beings are becoming conscious beings. Okay. And we are elevating ourselves above our animal ancestors, and we're becoming conscious. And with consciousness comes the dawn of evil, murder, right? I mean, isn't that like the entire point of Cain and Abel? Is they're the first human beings.
The first murder.
Adam and Eve are created by God, and then Cain and Abel are actually, birthed into the world, right? Well, let's talk about Adam and Eve for a moment. So they eat the apple, and the scales fall from their eyes. Well, first of all, why scales? Why does that evoke
because it was a snake
serpent,
who tempted
right?
them.
Yeah.
Come on.
But there's this idea that when they become self-conscious, like the very, very first thing that they realize is that they're naked. And how many people still have self-conscious dreams like that even today, right? Oh, I'm standing on stage. I'm in my underwear in front of the whole school, right? Oh God, that is literally that feeling of standing before God, realizing that you're naked. So there's this element of self-consciousness to the story of Adam and Eve. When they eat the apple of the knowledge of good and evil, they realize that good and evil exists. And once you come to that conscious understanding, that is the introduction, not just of good, but of evil to the world. So if I know what it feels like to be stabbed in the hand, and I know it hurts, and I do it to you willingly, the only reason why I know to do it to you to hurt you is because I know that it hurts me, because I am self-conscious, right?
And that you're also at a point where you're trying to inflict violence.
Right. That's evil. Right. That's evil.
The immorality part.
So the whole entire story of Adam and Eve gives birth to the story of Cain and Abel, which is the sort of foundation of civilization in a way. And it's haunting and scary when you realize that, because you slowly come to the realization that, humanity is going to be plagued by the mark of Cain. Resentment against God for not accepting my sacrifices for whatever reason it may be. It doesn't actually matter what the reason is, because that's just how things are. That's being. That's God, right? That is being itself. Sometimes we are dealt a hand of cards that we do not like. In fact, I would say most people are, right? Think of people who come into the world and, you don't ask for a low IQ, I don't think, right? And there's not a lot you can do to change your IQ. That's a reckoning with being itself. You don't ask to be ugly, okay? But that is inherent. There are inherent inequalities in the world as it exists, and so those are things we have to reconcile with as people. Okay, that is the action that I think Cain is very much a blueprint of how not to react to the bad hands that we are dealt in life, right?
It's almost like, it also brings it back to like Joseph, right? When his brothers are trying to kill him and they throw him into the pit,
very
and then
much so.
the redemption of how Joseph deals with it. It also, and then forgives them at the end, but almost like for his own benefit, not necessarily for them because they still suck. But Kingdom of Heaven, actually, the best thing about it is that it made me think about this. It made me think about Joseph because Orlando Bloom's character reminded me of him, and in the sense that all these injustices were happening to him, and then also Jonah, that he needed to get out of there, and leave, and sort of abandon everything he knew and put himself sort of in harm's way.
That's the biblical correlation. Certainly, you can also look at the Greeks. You've got Achilles who removes himself from the battle, right? And that's what Balian does in Kingdom of Heaven. He removes himself from the battle, and it's because he does that final battle sequence takes place. That how many people die in that sequence? It's literally because Balian is so torn up within himself, at conflict with his cultural values, and the Christian ethos and the Islamic ethos, and this war that's taking place is very reflective of what's happening inside of him as a character.
Correct.
And then he ends up just kind of removing himself, much like Achilles in the Iliad, and then that final battle sequence happens, and so many people die. You notice in that battle sequence the famous shot where Ridley takes the camera and just slowly lets it float up into the sky, and he allows the audience to feel perhaps like what a god or a conception of God may feel like when God is looking down, watching his creation, destroy itself. And
Destroy
I
each
think
other.
that's a little bit of how Ridley himself feels and why he's so preoccupied with this. I want to talk real quick about this idea. We were talking about Walter and David, and this idea of the warring brothers and Cain and Abel, and resentment and murder. I think you are onto some. You're obviously onto the actual themes of Covenant. That is the tensions between Creator and creation, right?
Yes.
The cycles of that patricidal impulse have those are so infused into the roots of the mythologies of the things that human beings have concerned themselves with for millennia. You think of the ancient Greeks. I'm always going to go back to them, but like the foundation of their world, of their mythos, of their ethos, the foundation of their creation myth is one so rooted in violence and the patricidal instinct that it's inextricable from Greek philosophy. So you have Gaia and Ouranos, the sky and the earth, right? And Ouranos is, I'm intentionally not saying Uranus, but yeah, Ouranos is so pressed up against Gaia that he smothers the children that are attempting to come out of Gaia, right? And that's obviously okay. I won't get into it, but it's like that's such an interesting dynamic between like even just the development of human religion. Like we move from earth cults, the great mother, the mother goddess, pure fertility, right? Pure woman.
And like what Maximus is praying to, like at the beginning of where he's praying to the gods and he's asking for guidance and stuff like that. That's not the Christian God.
But is it? But is it? We should talk about that another time, because I actually have a theory of Gladiator. Gladiator is, so Maximus is actually sort of, he prays to a heavenly father, right? He actually says heavenly father.
Okay, but the way that he's got those little clay figures and everything, I just rewatched Gladiator, some of it yesterday, and I was thinking, okay, this is like the gods. Also, a good juxtaposition here between Orlando Bloom's character and Maximus is that if he's the sort of like Joseph/Jonah character, biblically speaking, I think Maximus is very much like Daniel or Elijah. I don't want to say Noah because he was Noah with Aronofsky, but he is like the good man.
It's funny you bring up Daniel, because I mean he literally fights a tiger in the movie, right? So
there you go. I think he's the sort of stand-in for like ideal, because even Marcus Aurelius, Richard Harris's character, says like that he's his son. I mean, you look at him and you think like you don't want Commodus, okay? You always want Maximus,
right. But Ridley.
So I like that Ridley has
a lot of sympathy for Commodus in interviews. I don't know if you've read into that or not, but it's an interesting kind of nuance to his reading of that film, that he has a lot of sympathy for Commodus being kind of exiled by his father. Again, resentment against being. Well,
and again,
sideways.
We're back to Joseph, because Joseph and Benjamin were Jacob's favorites, right? And then Abel was the preferred child. I mean, you just the message here is don't have a favorite kid, especially if they're male. It just doesn't.
It goes really. It goes badly. Why can't everybody be like the Little Women and Little Women? That's the real good.
And Little Women, where they're all equally loved. I want to say this before, because we're like trailing on over an hour and 10 minutes now. There's so much that we could say, and I love everything that you bring in terms of historical context, and obviously all of your teaching and your knowledge is fantastic. But before we end, I think something that you said, as far as like the hostile environment, you could literally take like the Alien, Blade Runner, hostile environment territory and put it into like the patriarchy of Thelma and Louise and G.I. Jane, because I don't want to stop without us addressing those two, but they are in sort of a modern day version where it's not just sci-fi and it's not fantasy of like everything around you is operating in this very toxic system. How do you best navigate that without conforming to it in order to beat it is something that you and I think very much agree on and align with, in that it's in particular is how it pertains to women.
Yeah, yeah,
But what do you think
that's a
about that
great
idea?
connection that I actually kind of never actually I never made that connection. That's sort of what those movies are playing into. Um, the sort of the tension between, you know, the sort of resentful appeal of Thelma and Louise, um, violently lashing out at this low functioning, tyrannical, patriarchal distillation of the world where every single man in that movie is like an absolute monster. Um, except for Harvey Keitel.
Except for
And it's
Harvey
interesting
Keitel.
that Keitel is the one who, you know, I so Ridley in interviews has perplexed me because, you know, he seems very romantic about um, the appeal of Thelma and Louise flying off the cliff at the end. And yet, I still think that embedded in the image itself is sort of a cautionary element of, you know, if this is how you treat life, if this is how you react, um, then this is where it ends up, this sort of nihilistic
Mm,
void. And Keitel is the one who's left running, desperately attempting to catch up with them, but ultimately like eating their dust right before they eat their own
mm.
dust. And it's a tragedy in a way. I like that movie a lot. It's a difficult movie for me to contend with, but I like it a lot. I think I prefer GI Jane because, you know, what is it? Is it D.H. Lawrence that they quote in the movie? Yeah,
Yes. The
I never
wild thing
saw A
feeling sorry
Wild
for
Thing Sorry
itself.
for Itself.
Wild
Yeah,
thing feels.
I think that is
Mhm.
much more sort of and that is the optimal way to react to um, these ideas. Yeah,
Oppression.
yeah. Whatever labels you want to give it, I think that's the optimal way to do it, is to stand up and bear that weight on your shoulders and fight anyway. It's sort of this connects obviously to our Tenet episode with Frank. Is, you know, you're faced with this void of meaninglessness, and you decide to act like a hero anyway. You decide to fight for what's right anyway. I think Thelma and Louise plays into the that patricidal instinct that I was mentioning, going back to Alien
Exactly.
Covenant.
That's
Yeah,
why I thought of
yeah.
it.
And
Right.
just real quick to cap off the point that I was trying to make with Oranos and Gaia, um, you know, Cronus comes out and he castrates his father Oranos, and Oranos lifts up, and that's why there's a distance between the heavens, the sky, and the earth. That's what the Greeks kind of conjured that idea. And then, of course, Zeus ends up overtaking Cronus, his father. So, you know, Cronus is the god of the gods, and he got there because he had to essentially kill or attempt to kill his father, his creator. Um,
Hmm.
Zeus does the same thing to Cronus. Prometheus does the same thing to Zeus. It's these cycles, right? It's this cycle of
Right.
history, and you see it reflected as a pattern in the history of humanity. That fratricidal impulse of Cain and Abel is the same patricidal impulse that we see that we're talking about, because Cain killing Abel, it's a fratricide, it's the murder of a brother, but it's in retort, it's in that sort of anger toward God or
Right.
toward being.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
to connect it with Frankenstein, I just wanted to make that point, if you'll allow me. The, Frankenstein is such an interesting text. I'm not sure when the last time you read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was, but
It's one of my favorite
okay,
books.
excellent, great. So you'll know exactly what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. So the history behind that book is fascinating because it's coming out of the Romantic era, obviously, and so the Romantics like Byron, like Shelley. I mean, Percy Shelley, her husband, literally has a play. I think I have it right here, actually. Prometheus Unbound, right? It
Yes.
ties into Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, and so and then of course Lord Byron has a play called Cain, and it's basically the same thing. It's this idea of sort of getting into the headspace and trying to understand those beings who stand against God and then end up, like Milton's Satan, creating a heaven out of hell, which obviously Covenant is Frankenstein, but it's also Paradise Lost, like synthesized into one monstrous movie. Yeah.
Okay, but Tyler, how would you tie in, is there a way to tie in all these resentments and anger that you're saying is towards like the brother, the father, the God, and then channeled towards like women, like misogyny and even like the military, right?
Yeah.
Because it was something you just said made me think of that it's this that the military as represented in G.I. Jane, obviously everyone hates and is, and rightly so, that it's terrible. But at the same time, it is coming from these deeply embedded, like, I don't know. It's almost like it's based on this feeling of inadequacy that has to be trumped and it has to be like, like undone by order and hierarchy and all these rules. I'm almost thinking of like The Hill with Lumet, Lumet's movie, The Hill, where it's like that toxicity, I think, is coming out of inadequacy, and it's coming out of that jealousy. And then when it's towards women, it's just particularly uncomfortable now. It should have been always, but I think even more so now.
That is fascinating.
How would you relate those things?
Well, first of all, The Counselor is the Ridley Scott movie that I think of when I think about the relationship between the masculine and the feminine. That movie is explicitly about the irreconcilable differences between men and women. And if you go back and rewatch it, their characters say it over and over and over again. And that is one of the tensions of Greek tragedy, is this this sort of, again, perhaps irreconcilable rift between the sexes that perhaps we're attempting, certainly today we're attempting to bridge the gap for better and for worse.
Or just say that that neither of them exist, Tyler. We could also just go that route.
Well, careful, right? Be careful. So we mentioned that Top Gun and G.I. Jane are the same movie. I think it's very interesting that Tony opts for a male protagonist. Ridley opts for a female protagonist. Ridley's mother, I think her name was Elizabeth. I remember reading about her. I think it's in that New Yorker profile. Ridley's mother,
right? That
she was a pivotal figure in his life and Tony's life as well.
Yes. Right.
I think.
And very like strong, where they didn't disobey her. Like they were very respectful of her, and she was a very powerful presence for them.
I think Ridley has been obsessed with this idea of strong women in his whole career. You see it come out again and again.
Absolutely. Yes.
And G.I. Jane and Maverick in Top Gun are very similar characters. They're both kind of Promethean figures in a way. They stand against the system, right? They rise against the system. How many times does Maverick in Top Gun, go against the books, but end up doing it for the right reasons?
But I do see G.I. Jane as someone who is I do think that she's a real follower. The reason I like G.I. Jane more than Thelma and Louise as far as her character goes is because I don't like, this could just be a personal thing, but I don't like when movies have rebellious characters who are very immoral and where I feel like they're justified and I'm like rooting them on, because when Louise shoots the rapist guy, you do feel like, shoot him. I don't like that feeling.
It's perhaps
it's almost like
it's beckoning you to integrate your shadow perhaps better than Thelma or Louise ever do. It's like
rooting for a psychopath or understanding a psychopath. I don't feel comfortable I think it's a good exercise.
Well,
But
that's what it is. The
GI Jane
movie is, in a weird way, an exercise in kind of allowing you to dip your toe into those feelings, but also, again, you
right.
have to remember how it all turns out, right? You go
And then
careening
they have to keep
off the side of a
yeah, they have
cliff.
to keep
So,
but it's not just that, Tyler. I think the worst thing is that they end up harming innocent
oh
people, that they
yes,
keep,
yeah,
there's this like, what is it? The path to hell is paved with good
mm,
intentions. So there's just, it follows this, it follows that. It's almost like Blood Simple or A Simple Plan, where you have to then cover up the last thing you did has to be covered up, and
mm-hmm,
then a lie has to be done. And so, whereas with GI Jane, there's an upward
mm-hmm,
trajectory where the more that she refuses to treat others the way that she's treated, and she is
mm,
principled and she doesn't give in, and she says, the more that you guys don't believe in me, the more fired up I am and actually want to do this, that has an upward
yeah.
climb, and the Thelma and Louise has a
I'm going
descent.
to.
So I think that's
I'll
a
make the
key thing.
argument that the difference between the movies, and I'm not going to place a value judgment on this. When I say pagan and Christian, I don't mean the pagans they're bad. No, no, no. And the Christians they're good. I'm not placing a value judgment on this. I'm just saying Thelma and Louise seems to have a more pagan edge to it. It does have an
Right.
immorality to it that is more connected to perhaps the Chthonian nature of women, the power that they have over men, lashing back out against the men who have attempted to kind of create this idyllic. Well, I don't know how idyllic it is if people are feeling mistreated and unharmed and oppressed, but this again low functioning patriarchy. There are high functioning patriarchies that work, but this is a low functioning, low resolution, harmful patriarchal distillation of how some women view the world, and it allows you to sort of dig into that immoral, like, well, how about I just kill them all, um, it,
Right. And feel like absolutely
yeah,
justified in
and
doing
so
so. There's so many revenge movies like this with
right,
where,
yes, yeah,
yeah,
it's pagan in that way. GI Jane seems to me to be slightly more Christian in its ethos of, again, GI Jane's entire purpose is to bear the cross, bear the burden, bear the suffering, and she does suffer in that movie a lot. Bear the suffering of what it means to be, not just to be a woman, but to be. Everybody
I
suffers,
agree. A
right? Yeah,
person. It's about, I think it's about personhood more than
yeah,
it's about, to treat, because to me, and this is something that I've said
mm-hmm.
a lot that I get in trouble for saying, I suppose, but that the idea of like just wanting to be treated as an equal and not especially like, that's why I didn't like
Mm-hmm.
Barbie, because it's like saying, because I'm a woman, I should be more elevated than a man, and like women in charge is superior to men in charge. And I don't know why it can't just be, regardless of what you are, that we literally are just wanting equality. It's not that anybody deserves, I don't want to say parade because then that's the can of worms, but I mean, do you know what I mean? Like all of these concessions, and that, but then it gets into, oppression, and that people have been treated so
Mm-hmm.
badly that they feel they are owed. But that is not a Christian, that is not a Christ-like, let's say, not Christian, but like Jesus Christ level of the way to go about it.
Yeah, I don't know if we. Yeah, Barbie is fascinating because I see your perspective and I see someone like Jetta's perspective, and I
Mm-hmm.
understand both. I think Barbie is actually a lot more intricate and nuanced than its uh, it originally may initially seem. I think if you look at Barbie and the way that it actually operates as a narrative, like it begins in the matriarchal ideal, the idyllic
Paradise.
paradise. But how much of a paradise is it
Uh-huh.
actually? Right? Like, because I mean, things start to fall apart. Like, there's a reason why Barbie ends up having to go into the real world, because when the pendulum is swung too far into one direction, it inevitably is going to have to swing the other way too far into the other direction, and that's exactly what happens. Ken who feels like he has been pressed down and belittled and rejected, ends up
which is what we're
in a
saying.
Cain-like way, taking the system
Correct.
over and doing it in a completely backwards way. So I think the movie Barbie is about trying to find a way to put the pendulum back in the middle, which is why Barbie, in a way, rejects Barbie Land. She doesn't just reject the kingdom, she rejects Barbie Land, and she comes back to the real world. And in the real world, there are all sorts of things that, people have to do that are unpleasant. People are suffering, and that's a primary element of existence. And so where does she have to go? She has to go to the gynecologist, right? So there's I don't know, it got that icky edge that you talk about, but I like the overall arc and trajectory. The movie is on an arc. It's not just Barbie Land is great and men are terrible. It has this development to it. I don't think it's the greatest movie ever made or anything, but I also don't think it's the worst movie ever made. And also, I relate so much with Ken as a character that it's a little disturbing.
I know. But, and I was gonna say, this is the thing, Tyler. What you're illustrating is coming back to what is at the heart, even of The Last Duel. Now that I'm thinking about it, is like, I mean, so many Ridley Scott movies, even in my favorite part of Kingdom of Heaven was Eva Green. He always, and Jodie Comer, he has these very strong women. And I mean, arguably, I wonder if he would have had him if his mother hadn't been who she was, because this seems to come from like a primal, deep place for him. But that's another example, Last Duel, where the men are just weak and kind of children and don't know how to process their feelings in a constructive way.
Hope.
So
there's
it just
hope
all
at
comes
the end
out
of the
sideways.
Last Duel, though. She has that boy.
Yes.
And I adore the final shot of The Last Duel of this mother who's just sitting in this paradisal field with her child, away from the corrupted men. And there is hope that maybe this boy will be able to grow into a more integrated being, who doesn't one lash out at his wife, or two rape women. Those are our two primary male figures in that film. Maximus is much more
is kind
idyllic masculine form. Maximus is interesting. He is Christian. I'll just say it. So okay, Machiavelli in The Prince has this whole entire chapter on why the Roman Empire disintegrated. Okay, and this plays directly into Gladiator. Like, you're watching the empire at the more or less the beginning of its erosion. And so all of the reasons that Machiavelli gives for the Roman Empire disintegrating in The Prince is very interesting. He goes on and on about all these other things, but he never once mentions Christianity. And everybody knows that the Roman Empire didn't dissolve. It didn't collapse. It just changed form. It became a Christian empire. It went from being pagan to Christian. Constantine and all of that.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
But why? Why would Machiavelli, someone as wise and smart as Machiavelli, who understands how the world works, why would he just avoid bringing up Christianity? Well, obviously, embedded in the reason why he doesn't even bring it up is the fact that it's such a big reason that it becomes the reason, and so he doesn't even bring it up. It's like by excluding it, he's writing esoterically in a way. He's sort of hinting to the audience in a way that, I don't want to be persecuted by the church of my day, and so I'm not going to say that Christianity was the reason why the Roman Empire collapsed, but it is. And so in that way, I view Gladiator playing on that wavelength.
Like, it's just assumed.
Right.
Like, he doesn't need to say it because
we're not explicitly told that Maximus is a Christian.
We should know that.
But he's praying to a heavenly Father. He's praying in private. Okay, so that
On
right,
his knees.
that in and of itself is a Christian act. I've always read that. Well, not always. It was a revelation I had, a couple of years ago when I rewatched Gladiator. That Maximus is a Christian, of course, and he becomes this sort of sacrificial figure who changes and alters Rome. It brings Rome back to the people and all that, right? It's not
And that's what
it's
Marcus
not
wants.
historically accurate in the slightest, but that is something that no one should ever accept or assume that Ridley Scott is going to be historically accurate. Ridley Scott is much, much, much more interested in the ideas of myth and the truth of myth, rather than like the truth of history. The truth of history is materialistic. Here's what happened and exactly as it happened. And that's the most boring thing ever. Like, you want to take a video of yourself eating breakfast and getting ready for the day and then rewatch it back. That's exactly what happened moment to moment, but you're going to be bored out of your mind.
Right.
So
there's no narrative
so
here.
instead you extract the truth out of what happened and you give it this mystical edge. And that's what Gladiator is to me. That's what Napoleon is. It's not historically accurate. It's more historically accurate than people say it is. It is not, but like, he's trying to get to the essential truths of what it means to be human. And I come back to Frankenstein again. Frankenstein, maybe because I just read it and I'm going to be teaching it to my students here in a couple of weeks. But like, Mary Shelley, her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, that's sort of the progenitor of the modern feminist movement. She died in childbirth, giving birth to Mary Shelley. William Godwin, her father, is a believer in the Enlightenment. He believes that man can become like God through rationality, right? And so Mary Shelley grows up in this world where, one, she killed her own mother. Two, her father is this believer in this idea that the scientific project that we're currently embroiled in as a civilization can lead us to curing death and to human beings becoming new gods, which is in and of itself a Promethean ideal, right? To kill the old gods and become a new god. And so why Covenant and these movies that Ridley, Covenant specifically, but all of Ridley's movies in a way, toy with these ideas. And then of course, Mary Shelley also lost her child a year before she begins writing Frankenstein. She's in the headspace of someone who is dealing very, very much with creation, right? And so there's a reason why in Frankenstein, the creature is this kind of complex, anomalous figure. And I don't, of course, he reads a lot of Paradise Lost, which is important here. But he ends up destroying his own creator. And I think that plays into the anxieties of Mary Shelley. I think it plays into the anxieties of Ridley Scott in a way. This idea that progress is difficult and hard and perhaps futile. And what is progress ultimately attempting to move us toward, and how is that going to kind of take apart the traditions of the past? We just want to be careful about it, right? Like we need to be careful about taking apart the traditions and the myths of the past. And so, Nietzsche has this quote. I know I'm rambling, but I'm going to wrap up in a moment. But it's like,
no, I'm going to stop you in a second. But we'll end it with Nietzsche.
Yeah, Nietzsche has this quote: "Wisdom is a crime against nature." Right, and I look at that scene in Covenant of Orem, Billy Crudup's character, peeking into the egg. And people will watch that scene and be like, "What an idiot! Why is he doing that? Why would you do that? Like you're
right.
stupid."
Why did he trust David? Because he trusts that David is saying that it's okay.
Not only that, Orem is a Christian. It's explicitly made in the movie that he's a Christian.
He's a man of faith.
And so his faith leads him to seeking knowledge. His peeking into the egg is so reflective of Adam and Eve eating the apple of the knowledge of good and evil. And David is this sort of serpent-like creature who's beckoning him to go, look inside and from that comes the face hugger and then the xenomorph. And the xenomorph, to me, to kind of put a bow on all of everything that we've been talking about, the xenomorph is the mark of Cain. It's it's lots of mythological creatures in one. It's the Furies, it's Kali, it's Pazuzu, it's medieval dragons of chaos, but it's also the Mark of Cain. It's a byproduct, pure, perfect, evolutionary, materialistically perfect biological organism that is a byproduct of this tension between David and his creator and the engineers. And there's a reason why when he drops the black goo, it forms a double helix. It's in our DNA.
Yeah.
It's this compulsion to destroy our creator and to and at what cost is embedded in the human experience.
But it's also to destroy ourselves. We didn't get into this at all.
That's the xenomorph. It destroys humanity, right?
That's the right.
That's Batty.
Right.
That's Roy Batty in Blade Runner. I want more life, and he's squeezing his father. Right? He's squeezing his father's eyes out of the sockets. What are the eyes? That's consciousness. He's resentful, and he's attacking his God. And there's justice there. That's what's so complex, is there is this element of justice to what Thelma and Louise are doing. There's an element of justice to what Roy Batty is doing. There's an element of justice to what David is doing. There's an element of justice,
right, it's the Thanos
to
thing.
the patricidal impulse, but it's dangerous.
And also to clean slating and to trying to tip the scale back to create some sort of balance by tacking an extreme to
it's
with
not
an
just
extreme.
it's not
okay.
Well,
Tyler.
one more thing, just a quick, very very quick. It's not just the patricidal impulse Ridley's obsessed about; it's the matricidal impulse. Remember what Ripley does in Alien?
Yes.
She destroys Mother, the computer.
Right.
So that's just a little fun little thing in Alien.
But then there's also the comment that David makes that they just needed a mother. That when they went down.
How messed up is it that Shaw isn't able to have children and then is made the mother of the xenomorph? That's so messed up. It's like Ridley is playing in this sandbox. He makes them the Adam and Eve of evil in a
terrible
way.
But then the fact that she does her absolute utmost to get rid of it is just so empowering. Now that's what the counter to the flying off the cliff for me is the C-section and the bravery, like the absolute, like, I have to get rid of this awful thing, and to like putting aside any sort of fear that one may have in doing so is so much more cathartic to me than like the resignation of like, well, we can't beat these men, so we might as well just like, I don't even know what they're trying to say. Like remove ourselves from the equation, which seems like rebellious, but it actually isn't.
There's a hubris there. And this is the last point I'll make about Ridley's filmography. The last point. He's obsessed with hubris. And I think you can see that. It's very interesting. This is something it's always great when you notice something yourself and you try to see if anyone else has ever discovered it before and you don't see it anywhere. And it's like, oh, this is great. Something I've noticed, there's a line of comparison between Covenant and Blade Runner. Obviously, there are many, but when Roy Batty enters one scene, he misquotes William Blake. He says, "Fiery the angels fell," and then he continues the poetic line. This is when he goes to like the eyeball doctor or whatever. It's in the really blue room or whatever. He's trying to find Tyrell. He says, "Fiery the angels fell." The actual quote from Blake is, "Fiery the angels rose." And so right there you see this idea that whether he's intentionally misquoting Blake or not, he sees himself as a fallen angel. He sees himself as Lucifer, the bringer of light. He sees himself as Milton's Satan. The same exact thing happens in Alien Covenant when David misattributes "Look on my works, ye mighty in despair" as a quote from Byron. And he's corrected by Walter, and Walter tells him that's Percy Shelley. So there's some wires crossed in there, bud. You're getting a little too big for your britches. You're a little too hubristic. And then it's interesting. I think the only other person in the world who has caught on to that is Denis Villeneuve when he made Blade Runner 2049, he makes these are all androids we're talking about, or replicants, right? He makes the test in the movie, cells interlinked, right? Like this is the test that they have to undergo to make sure that everything is working accordingly for the replicants in Blade Runner 2049. That test is using a quote from a poem by Vladimir Nabokov. So it's like if the replicants start misquoting the quote, maybe there's something wrong or something like that. So it's just very
I see what you're saying. It's an indication.
Very interesting that I almost just said Ripley. Ridley has kind of hyper fixated on these ideas, and I think it's all part of his obsession with human folly and hubris, but also these ideas of redemption. You see G.I. Jane, we talked about her being a Christ figure. Batty is interesting because he's a Christ figure. You know, he puts the nail in his hand at the end of Blade Runner. That's how much more obvious can you get? But it's in his death that Roy Batty conveys to Deckard what it means to be alive, what it means to be human. I don't care if Deckard is a replicant or not. Would I prefer Deckard to be a human to kind of make the point more potent? Yes. But if Ridley Scott wants, I can't get Alien out of my head. This is a problem I've had my whole life. I can't get Alien out of my head. If Ridley Scott wants Deckard to be a replicant, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point of that movie sees Deckard realizing what it means to be human amidst the inhuman. And so Batty, in a way, he's holding the dove. He has the nail in his hand, and he dies. And Deckard, watching Batty's death, he realizes what it means to be human. All the good and all the bad. And that is the essence of Ridley's entire career, what it means to be human. All the good and all the bad. So,
Tyler, before Tyler and I scheduled this, Tyler was like, I'm going to try to make this the longest episode that you've ever had. Tyler, you have exceeded this. So congratulations. I have to say
broke
that
a new record.
Broke a record, the record. But I think that this is very rich. And part of why I want to do this series is so that I can move away from just focusing on one or two films. It's so much more meaningful to me. Like, even if nobody watched this or anybody listened to it, for me to go through a director's filmography like this in a short period of time and start to notice all these nuances, it's so much more a cohesive, holistic experience. Honestly, I have to credit this to you too, which was a surprising result, that I think some of the best writing I've ever done has been on these few movies, like having Prometheus and then Covenant and Hannibal. It really has brought out a lot in me.
Covenant was great. It was really good. Why do you think you connected so much with that film?
With Alien Covenant?
I was surprised. I thought she loved Prometheus so much because of Shaw. She's going to absolutely hate what they do with her character. And obviously it's intentional. You're supposed to hate what they do with their character. It's intentionally horrific. But I'm curious, just on your end, and I know we're trying to wrap up, but just if you can be, whatever, I would love to hear, what about that film? I've blabbered on for, so long about like all of the myths and history and perspective that's in the film, and what that can convey thematically and subtextually. But I haven't talked at all on a personal level why it connects with me. I could have, but I won't. I'm curious about, for you on a personal level, what about Prometheus and Covenant? Because those are movies that are really overlooked and disregarded by a lot of people, especially when they came out.
And underrated.
And extremely underrated. I think they're a couple of the greatest movies ever made. But I'm curious, what is the personal transformation or tie-in that you got from it?
Yeah, I think it's part there for Prometheus. It's definitely Elizabeth and David, the introduction to David's character and that whole longing. It's kind of mirrors a little bit like Maximus's longing to go home. This idea of that you could return to your origin, whether that is intellectual or physical, because he just wants to go home to his wife and son. And there's this, it's just such a heavenly, when Marcus says, like, describe what's home like, he just softens, and it's this beautiful idea. So I think that as humans, we're so preoccupied with where we came from, why are we here? But that the whole preoccupation that David has is fascinating because he's not a person. So I think that allows for a level of maybe intellectualizing that wouldn't otherwise be there. Like, I'm able to look at David's journey in a rational way, whereas the female characters allow for the emotional output. And for Covenant, I was going to say it was about a 3.5 for me for most of the way. But then the end line about the cabin.
Don't let the bed bugs
and
bite.
Then I didn't know that it was
Really?
David. Okay.
Oh, I feel like most people will kind of catch on to that. And then they use that as a critique of the movie. Like, oh, we all knew it was going to be David. But it's like, no. The whole point that you knew makes it even worse that when it's revealed, So it works both ways.
Okay, so yeah. I guessed when Mother said over the system, there's a foreign presence here or whatever in the ship. I thought, oh, it couldn't be David. No, because I was like, his hand's gone. I for some reason thought that there's no way it could be David because the hand was gone. And so I thought it was Walter because his hand's missing. And so when they have that moment and she says that, and then you see on his face that he doesn't know what she's talking about.
The best. It may legitimately be my favorite ending of a movie. Like,
honestly,
and then
well, whatever you want to call that reveal moment, that twist,
so
where
dark,
you're like, oh my gosh,
and the music in that moment is great too. But
and she sees it, like
her face
she knows that. Yeah. Oh my gosh! And then she's like, "Get me out of here!" And then you know that it's so hopeless.
Let the bed bugs bite, and then the Wagner just ties it all together. Yeah.
Yes. And then of course the horror of like, what the hell is David going to do? And then, okay, that moment to me counts for so much, because I had that moment in Old Boy as well, where you are given a beat to process what the weight of the revelation is, and you're like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I mean, in both of those instances, I like had to pause it because I just was overwhelmed by the level of what that meant to the character, who was then completely doomed and could never come back from it. Like, that's like one of those things where like you're told something and there was like your life before and your life after. I don't know. So that is like, it was so masterfully done. And I just thought, wow, this is like, thank God I didn't know. Have you seen Angel Heart?
Many years ago.
Angel Heart?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's another thing where it's slowly revealed who Mickey Rourke is.
I got a thing about chickens.
When you contemplate the weight of the thing. No, you're right. It's just almost too much. And I love those moments in film. So that really, really elevated it to me. And I'm glad that I had no idea.
Good.
I really am, because that was such a good bait and switch.
And ending on Wagner is perfect because, again, we circle back around to the beginning of his career where he was trying to make a Wagnerian film, space opera. And so the space opera has, over time in Ridley's mind, I suppose, evolved into, this horrifically dark, twisted ending. And now you know, for the past few years, desperately wanting more David and to see what he's going to do to all of those, colonists. And if you thought what he did to Shaw was bad, that was just with one human being. Now he has an unlimited supply almost. So, I really hope that Ridley at some point within the next, I mean, he's almost 90 at this point. So I really hope he's able to make his final Alien film. If not, I think on the horizon, he's got some interesting things incoming. So we'll see. That we're very much in the twilight of his career, and I am just desperately attempting in all ways to kind of soak it up for all it's worth, because it is worth a lot.
Well, And we'll see what Tyler's take is on Gladiator 2.
I have an idea of
when
I
that
have an
comes out
idea of what
Thanksgiving.
it's going to be. Yeah.
I have an idea of your
Yeah.
proclivities, Tyler. Tyler, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you for making me do this. I appreciate it. I hope that we have maybe in one way or another proven that Ridley Scott is worthy of being called a
I hope so.
provocateur
Yeah.
and an auteur
Mm-hmm.
just in general. And we'll see you at the movies.